Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. As the world descends further and further into chaos with conflict on so many different horizons, we're asking the critical question: are we now heading for more military conflicts around the world? And are the words of Jesus in the Olivert Discourse being fulfilled, where he warns of wars and rumors of wars? I'm Regan King, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Simon Barrett. Evening, Simon.
Hey, good evening, Regan. Good to see you.
Such an important conversation that we need to have this evening. We've seen some escalation in the Middle East further, with both the United Kingdom and the United States firing rockets in retaliation on Houthi rebels who have been seeking to disrupt shipping in the Red Sea. The UK and the US have interestingly denied that this has anything to do with taking a side in the Israel-Hamas conflict. A very strange and interesting thing to say at the same time. But undeniably, as the two are interwoven and connected, we could see how this opens up further arenas of this growing conflict.
I mean, it's extraordinary. Just as the day of this recording, we got the front page of the Times where we have our Defence Secretary Grant Shapps saying the world on a perilous path to war within 5 years, as he gave a statement speech of the state of world affairs in terms of the direction we're heading in. And he's saying that potentially in 5 years' time we could be at war with Russia, China, Iran, and other failed states, including North Korea as well. So effectively, we're living in a time where I think the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this, but the kind of breakup of the post-order that emerged after the Second World War. So we saw the establishment of the United Nations, the formation of NATO, the creation of the European Union, and we're seeing this start to really kind of unravel in our day as we see a kind of weakening American leadership on the world stage is leading to an increase in authoritarian regimes such as China and Russia, and of course Iran, who have triggered the green light for the Houthis to attack Western shipping in the Red Sea, as well as the attacks on Israel on October the 7th. So I think it's interesting how we're seeing our Prime Minister and our Defence Minister giving us a chilling warning of the future. And then this is also combined by the fact that the Germans have just released a secret paper in which they've really exposed the fact that they see the prospect that Russia could actually invade Germany in 2025. How much of that is true, I don't know, but we know, for example, that Sweden is extremely concerned and mobilising for war. The Baltic states are very concerned, and now we have the biggest call-up of our armed forces for a NATO exercise in the history of NATO. So we're living in perilous and dangerous times, that's for sure. And does this link to what Jesus said in Mathew 24 about the Olivert Discourse, that there will be wars and rumours of wars as one of the signs before the coming of the Lord? I think this is becoming more and more evident.
Absolutely, Simon. I think over the years we've talked about some of the escalation going on in various places, things to look out for. Things are definitely ramping up, and this latest report from Grant Shapps and the warnings that we're having from all sides. We're not even going to be touching on some things like the concerns over AI and how that might all play into it. But we're in a very perilous time, in a chaotic time. And for believers, we need to think seriously, we need to think clearly, we need to think biblically in this reality. I've heard it said before, it's good to have your Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other, and maybe with some disclaimers. I think there's a degree of reality to that. We can't stick our head in the sands, and we can't live in denial of the ever-changing world that we're living in, going further and further into a state of depravity. Now, the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he gave an interview to the Mail on Sunday on a visit to war-torn Ukraine, and he warned then that the world is facing its most volatile period in decades, with attacks in the Red Sea, war in Gaza, and the Ukraine conflict. he didn't even touch on the China-Taiwan growing ruckus that could be occurring or on the horizon. Grant Shapps, though, the UK Defence Secretary, according to The Spectator, has pledged 20,000 British personnel to take part in a major NATO exercise to prepare for potential further Russia and invasion of Europe. So we're talking not just Ukraine, the potential, and Putin has threatened this. He has spoken. He's given warnings of this. Various states have been very well on the alert for now almost 2 years of the potential for a Russian invasion of other regions in Europe. His words are unvarnished. We're in a new era, and we must be prepared to deter our enemies. He will say in a speech in London, the foundations of the world order are being shaken to the core. We stand at a crossroads. And we could see, as a result, throughout 2024, escalation in military conflicts globally, with a range of alliances and allegiances and ideologies being present. It'll be interesting to see how all of this pans out.
No, absolutely. So let's kick off with the latest military developments, and this is the first time since the US and the British carried out airstrikes on ISIS in northern Iraq and Syria that we've seen, again, America and the United States target the Houthi rebels in Yemen. So on Friday, the 20th of January, the US and military carried out airstrikes against the Houthi rebels, targeting 60 military targets, including an airbase, airport and army camp that killed 5 Houthi terrorists. The attacks against the Houthis were launched in response to the rebel group attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea area for months. We see there that the furious Houthi rebels have vowed to retaliate to a scale beyond imagination, with leaders warning that the US and the UK will have to prepare to pay a heavy price. And according to the Guardian online article entitled "Who are the Houthis and how did the US and UK strike on Lebanon come about?" they said that who are the Houthis? The Houthis are a Yemenite militia group named after their founder, Hussein Bahreddin al-Houthi, and representing the Yazidi branch of Shia Islam. They emerged in the 1980s in opposition to Saudi Arabia's religious influence in Yemen. The group, which has an estimated 20,000 fighters and whose official name is Ansar Allah, runs most of the west of the country as is in charge of the Red Sea coastline.
The Houthis are backed by Iran as part of its long-standing hostility with Saudi Arabia and are supporting Hamas in the war in Gaza. Soon after the Hamas massacre on the 7th of October, the Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi said his forces were ready to move in the hundreds of thousands to join the Palestinian people and confront the enemy. Quite full on. How many are a part of their force? Do we know, Simon, how many? Do they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands?
Well, according to the Guardian, it's 20,000 terrorists they have at their disposal. Maths
isn't a strong suit in this case. 20,000 doesn't approach in the hundreds of thousands. But this was the threat of the Houthis, who are also threatening the UK and the US, while branded generally by the world over as a militia band of rebels. They're saying that they're going to wreak and retaliate damage on the US and UK in a way that is beyond the imagination. Now, it's interesting because they may be speaking in regards to their ongoing alliance with Iran. This is one of the realities. Iran is powerful. Of course, Iran has so many proxy armies around the world, really around the Middle Eastern world, that potentially this could be referring to some sort of alliance like that. But the Red Sea, which is one of the world's most densely packed shipping channels, lies south of the Suez Canal. It's the most significant waterway connecting Europe to Asia and East Africa. Yemen is situated, we had the map a minute ago, we can bring it up again, along the sea's southeast coast where it meets the Gulf of Aden. Shortly after the start of the Gaza war, the Houthis began launching missile and drone attacks at vessels in the Red Sea. And you see there over on the right-hand side the Gulf of Aden, and then you see up in the left-hand side or the corner, the Red Sea. Most of these missiles were intercepted by the U.S. and Israeli countermeasures. But the situation escalated on the 19th of November when militants used a helicopter to seize a car carrier chartered by a Japanese company and linked to an Israeli businessman, abducting the crew as well. The Houthis said that all vessels they perceived as linked to Israel or its allies would become a legitimate target for armed forces. Multiple attacks on vessels followed, mostly without success, but many shipping companies have nevertheless decided to bypass the Red Sea route and divert around South Africa's Cape of Good Hope, significantly adding to journey times and cost, and of course the common man incurs the cost.
Absolutely, we're talking millions in terms of kind of loss in world trade. But also the fact is that, we're seeing that amongst the narrative of the left, saying that really that the Houthi rebels are showing solidarity with the residents of Gaza in trying to defy the Israelis, and this is why they're targeting international shipping, and all Israel has to do is bow to pressure and allow for a ceasefire, and then the Houthis will actually stop the attacks on commercial shipping through the Red Sea. But none of this would be able to happen if the regime in Tehran didn't give them the green light and the go-ahead to do it. So this is all part of a coordinated campaign to actually mobilize Iranian forces and militia groups across the region to attack not only Israel but also the West as well.
The U.S. has refrained, despite the attacks, the inarguable provocation of the Houthis by firing directly on U.S. ships and indeed also U.S. military ships. They refrained from any direct confrontation until 31st of December when the U.S. Navy helicopters fired on a group of small boats attempting to board a container ship that had requested their protection. The deaths of 10 militants marked a new phase in the crisis, the deaths of 10 terrorists, we can say. On the 9th of January, there's a further escalation as U.S. and British warships shot down 21 drones and missiles fired by the Houthis in what London called the largest such attack in the area. On 10th of January, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, said further attacks could prompt a Western military response.
And our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in an interview with the Mail on Sunday, remarks that before airstrikes were launched on the Houthi rebels, the Royal Navy warship known as HMS Diamond was attacked by drones, cruise and ballistic missiles. The British warship crew launched a volley of air defence missiles to destroy the Iranian-supplied weapons. And Sunak said that they, the Houthis, have carried out the biggest attack on a Royal Navy warship in decades.
Now, it's important, I think, Simon, to unpack a little bit of the modern history of the conflict in Yemen. There's been ongoing conflict in that region for a while now, and a lot of people, even some of the viewers of Revelation TV, have commented that in the past that not much has been spoken of regarding the conflict in Yemen. I'm sure there are a range of reasons for that, but here's what's been going on. According to The Guardian, the Houthis had been gaining support around the late 1990s and despised the pro-Saudi President Ali Abdullah Saleh, especially after the 9/11 and attacks in the war in Iraq in 2003. Riots and several assassination attempts on Saleh's life forced him to resign in 2012. In 2014, the Houthis allied with their former enemy Saleh to seize the capital, Sana'a, and overthrew the new Western-backed president, Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi, a year later. After Hadi was forced to flee, the exiled Yemeni government asked its allies in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to launch a military campaign, also backed by the West, to drive out the Houthis. A catastrophic civil war ensued that the UN estimates to have led to 377,000 deaths, displacing 4 million people by the end of 2021. Now, the Houthis, in effect, did win the war. An April 2022 ceasefire prompted a significant decline in violence, and fighting has largely remained in place despite the official expiry of the truce in October.
So let's have a look now at the latest developments in Yemen as we see US and British Air Force carry out airstrikes against the Houthi rebels' positions in Yemen.
President Biden authorized the strikes that hit at least 16 military sites in Yemen. Since November 19th, the Houthis have hit ships from 40 different countries.
These attacks against vessels in the Red Sea pose a direct threat to the lives, to freedom of navigation, and to global trade in one of the world's most critical waterways.
The Houthi attacks have had a major impact on global trade, since around 15% of that trade flows through the Red Sea.
What's happened because of these Houthi attacks against commercial shipping is that thousands of ships have had to divert, take longer routes, pay more for insurance, and that gets translated into higher prices for people for everything from fuel to medicine to food.
On Thursday, the UN Security Council condemned in the strongest terms the Houthi attacks. The attacks come as Israel is keeping up its assault on Hamas in Gaza, but facing criticism from some in the U.S. On Capitol Hill, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a resolution that could cut aid to Israel. The Senate is scheduled to vote this Tuesday on a bill targeted at Israel that would require the State Department to report every 30 days on alleged human rights violations in foreign countries. If the State Department fails to issue a report, all security assistance to Israel would be cut. And at the International Court of Justice, Israel is defending itself after South Africa put forward its argument that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Yet one more front facing Israel during its darkest hour since the Holocaust.
Always very thankful to our friends at CBN for their helpful, incisive reporting. Now, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, has given an interview to the Mail on Sunday whilst on a solidarity visit to Ukraine, warning that the world is facing its most volatile time in years. The headline reads that Rishi Sunak warns the world is facing the most volatile time in years with attacks in the Red Sea, war in Gaza, and Ukraine conflict. The Prime Minister told the Mail that the attacks in the Red Sea, the Gaza war, and the continued conflict in Ukraine present Western governments with multiple diplomatic challenges. In a dramatic escalation of the Middle East crisis, Mr. Sunak signed off on British airstrikes against military infrastructure in Yemen on Friday. Now, this is somewhat controversial, as it turns out, Simon, because there are opponents who are saying, oh, did you not sign this off? Why didn't you sign this off? Should this have been signed off in Parliament? But this is his right and his prerogative in this particular instance as the Prime Minister of the nation. And it's not about going to war. It's about a retaliatory strike needed to continue to keep safe our shipping.
No, and also I think it was an attack on the, which is not mentioned by so many of our kind of mainstream media and some of more of our kind of, I'll be generous, left-leaning, broadsheets, that they don't actually mention the fact that, HMS Diamond was attacked. Now, what happens then if one of your biggest warships, it gets attacked by Houthi forces, and it's so badly damaged, what deterrent capabilities does the Royal Navy have then? So in order to show deterrence and to say that this is a provocation too far, this is why I think Rishi decided that he had to act and had to show a strong response to the kind of Houthi rebels. Many are saying that by the West, by the US and by Britain exchanging fire and targeting 60 different military targets and infrastructure in Yemen against the Houthis will lead to kind of provocation in the region. Now, the danger is that what happens if the Houthi rebels, for example, stop all international and commercial shipping, has a huge impact on the world economy. The price of goods goes up and a massive increase. Then you have a huge problem with inflation again. Then there's a shortage of goods. And you then start to have social unrest. So in order to preserve international shipping and also to give the Iranians a message as well of saying, look, the Houthis continue to attack our ships, then you can expect a firm response. But, I just think our weaponry and our armory, both US and British, is absolutely no match for the Houthi rebels.
Well, speaking to the Mail on Sunday whilst on his visit to Ukraine, Rishi Sunak had only hours previously ordered the airstrikes on the Houthi rebels, said it's very telling that these things have happened at the same time. That is illustrative of the world we are living in. I think the world is probably the most unstable it has been in decades. Well, President Joe Biden has said that the U.S. has issued a private warning to Iran over its support for the Houthis, which is, I find, another strange thing to say, a private warning to Iran over its support for the Houthis. They're supporting all of these militias and terror groups across
Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Let's just give a soft private warning, just a word between friends. This is not the relationship the U.S. has with Iran. It's a very strange thing to put it that way, to be honest. But Andrew Murray, an ally of Jeremy Corbyn and former communist, told thousands of protesters in London that the government and Royal Navy were, quote, arming a genocide, end quote, adding that Mr. Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer were, quote, up to their waist in Palestinian blood, end quote. Raising fears of an attack on Israel, Houthi terrorists released a video of its fighters storming a compound in a mock exercise. Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters demonstrated outside the British embassy in Tehran.
And this really does lead us on to the big question of today's programme. Are we seeing an increase in wars and rumours of wars, as mentioned in Mathew 24? And Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister's response is this. He said, can we do, so he was asked, for example, does the UK have a global reach to be involved in multiple conflicts? And Rishi Sunak said, can we do all these things? You are talking to me in the Ukraine about what we have to do in the Red Sea, which illustrates that the world we are living in is becoming more challenging. It is more complex. My job is to make sure the British people are safe. Can we afford to do these things? We can't afford not to. It's all about economic security because the impact of the Red Sea attacks on the price people pay at home. We've already seen the impact of oil prices of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine.
Now, Iran is mobilizing their militias for war. According to an article written in The Spectator by Jake Wallace-Simons, entitled Why the West Should Target Iran as Well as the Houthis, Simons writes, since the 7th of October, Iran has activated its militia across the region. This aggression has been carefully calibrated to cause the West pain without provoking war. Hezbollah has fired sufficient rockets into Israel to force 100,000 Israelis to evacuate away from the border into government-funded hotels in the south. There have been attacks on American bases in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis have been stealing the headlines by forcing cargo ships to direct around the Cape of Good Hope at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. After launching their coup in 2015, the Yemeni militants have morphed into a key Iranian proxy, receiving increasingly sophisticated weaponry that has been smuggled in by sea and deployed against Tehran's great rival, Saudi Arabia. Its leaders received training from Hezbollah, Iran's pet army in Lebanon. It's an obvious match. The Houthis' slogan is there, God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. It may be clunky, but it hardly lacks clarity. As Grant Shapps pointed out in the Daily Telegraph, Britain's strikes on Yemen were principally a warning to Iran. With that, we now approach another possible arena for conflict in 2024 as the escalation of conflict along the Lebanese border remains a very live threat. More from our friends at CBN News.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is making it clear Israel must continue its battle in Gaza until it achieves total victory.
We must not stop the war until we complete all its objectives. The elimination of Hamas, the return of all our hostages, and the promise that Gaza won't pose a threat to Israel anymore.
Over the weekend, IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari explained some of the challenges of the war in a briefing to the nation. He says one of the main goals is dismantling Hamas.
Hamas battalions use a complex underground system with infrastructure to manufacture weapons, war rooms, command and control centers, and the capability to launch rockets from above and below ground. The terrorists move between different areas in the Gaza Strip using this infrastructure, allowing them to do so covertly.
Hagari said there are 5 objectives: eliminating Hamas commanders, ground combat against the terrorists, gather intelligence from computers, maps, communication devices, locate and destroy rockets, weapons, and sites where they are manufactured, and destroy the underground infrastructure.
This is the Gaza Strip. It covers 365 square kilometers and its population is over 2 million people. This is the northern Gaza Strip, where we began our ground operation and have been fighting for the past 3 months. In the northern Gaza Strip, Hamas had 2 military brigades with 12 battalions in total, consisting of about 14,000 terrorists total.
He said Israel has accomplished its goals in northern Gaza and is now turning its attention to southern Gaza. Israeli troops located a 320-foot-long strategic tunnel shaft leading to a weapons production site. The IDF says their forces found proof that under Iranian guidance, Hamas terrorists learned how to operate and build precise components and strategic weapons and gain technological knowledge in the field. They shared images of what they said was a rocket engine and a Hamas-developed warhead of a cruise missile. And Hamas wants its ideology passed along to the next generation. In an interview with NBC's Meet the Press, Israeli President Isaac Herzog revealed the discovery of a document detailing Hamas's plan to host and train children in summer camps to hate Jews, promote religious extremism and violence, and make them the terrorists of the next generation.
It's a brochure which is a directive by the commanders of Hamas as to how to manage summer camps for children in order to disseminate the values of jihad. It says it clearly, to disseminate the values of jihad and the values of the resistance, meaning terror, and how to make it a militarized society.
And U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has been traveling throughout the Middle East before arriving in Israel. He's expected to press for a shift to lower intensity fighting as he warns that the fighting could spread beyond Gaza. Israel is indeed warning of another war in the north as Hezbollah marked the 3-month anniversary of the war by stepping up its attacks. Israel retaliated, striking what it called significant Hezbollah military assets in a compound used by Hezbollah's surface-to-air missile unit as the fighting near the border of Lebanon heats up. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
So we could see there the other fault line open up, and that would be a military conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. But I suppose the big question you have to ask is that it's been really brewing ever since the Islamic Republic of Iran took power and overthrew the Shah in Iran back in 1979. And this constant war against Israel, this constant war against the United States and against the West. When are we going to have that showdown between the West and Iran? And of course, the Iranians are wanting that showdown because they were wanting to bring back the Shia Messiah, known as the 12th Imam, and that through military conflict, the 12th Imam will emerge from a cave and usher in a new era of global dominance by Shia Islam, and that Tehran will be the capital of the world, and they can wait for their Shia Messiah to arrive. So this is something that the West doesn't understand. It doesn't understand the religious theology and the mindset of the Islamic Republic of Iran, of Hamas, the Houthi rebels, and doesn't understand the region, the Middle East at all. And this is why, for example, only the strongest survive. And that's why for Israel to survive and for the more moderate Arab states to survive, then it's absolutely essential that Israel destroys not only Hamas, but also Hezbollah as well.
Absolutely, Simon. And we can consider what's been going on in the past couple of years. It's been a number of years now that we've been discussing this potential escalation with Iran on this program, on Behind the Headlines. And it just seems as if we're reaching that tipping point where we will actually slide into that. But there's another possible arena. I mean, as if it couldn't get any more chaotic, as if it couldn't get worse. Look, we know God is in control. We know that He is sovereign. And so we need not have fear. We should not live in fear. But we do need to be prepared, and we do need to understand likely scenarios that are coming up. And this is one that may have escaped many people's radar. There's, according to a Daily Mail article published on the 15th of January of 2024, Germany is preparing for Putin attack against NATO in 2025. As secret plans reveal step by step how Russia will escalate conflict to all-out war in 18 months.
Yes, I say that secret documents from Germany's Ministry of Defense reveal step-to-step doomsday guide on how Russia will escalate the conflict in Ukraine to an all-out war in just 18 months. The leaked plans, published by the German newspaper Bild, reveal in detail the path to a third world war, with Putin using Belarus as a launching pad for an invasion, as he did in February 2022 for his war with Ukraine. The release of the terrifying documents come just days after Sweden's civil defense minister warned that his country could soon face the prospect of war, and urged citizens to join the voluntary defense organization in preparation for a Russian attack. Now, this could be two motives. Sometimes you have to realize that why have the German government decided to release these secret files on potentially Russian invasion of NATO, including an invasion on Germany in 2025, which is only next year. Is this one to warn and prepare the citizens of Europe for a potential war? Is this then to generate more GDP income to Ukraine to help Ukraine push back the kind of a Russian offensive? Or is this a way of encouraging more of the European public that we need more taxes in order to rebuild up our armaments in preparation for war? Or is this actually based on true intelligence information that the Germans have got that would indicate that the Russian and Putin are actually preparing for a major military offensive to actually attack NATO? And we know what the NATO response will be, which will lead to kind of World War III. And we see on the screen there the steps that the German government believe that Russia could take over the coming months and into next year.
Well, Germany's defense leaders are taking the threat from Moscow seriously, with the Bundeswehr preparing for a hybrid Russian attack on NATO's eastern flank by the summer of 2025. The secret Alliance Defense 2025 document details how Russia will mobilize another 200,000 soldiers in Russia before launching a spring offensive against Ukrainian forces in spring of this year. By June, amid dwindling Western support and weaponry, Russia would achieve success on the battlefield and make significant advances through Ukraine, according to these leaked documents. Taking advantage of this success, Putin would in July begin launching cyber attacks in the Baltics at the same time as inciting violence in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania by claiming that ethnic Russian minorities are being targeted. This tactic has already been used by Putin's cronies to justify their attack on Ukraine in 2014 and again in 2022 when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. With clashes set to occur, according to this plan, in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as a result of Russia's interference, and Putin would use this as an excuse to launch a large-scale exercise with 50,000 Russian troops sent to Belarus and Western Russia by September. A month later, Putin would then go on a step further, moving troops and medium-range missiles to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, which is nestled in between Poland and Lithuania. So a really troubling state of affairs, Simon. We're seeing the potential for global conflict escalating on a range of fronts, and really, could they all come at the same time? Is it possible that we could have another situation of very much an allies versus an axis of evil type crisis? That's what we're seeing.
Absolutely, particularly we already seen these alliance mergers already between Russia and Iran, and the fact that the Russians are using Iranian kamikaze drones, certainly against the Ukrainians and against Ukrainian cities. We also see a strong development of alliance between Russia and China. So it's not beyond the possibility that we could see an actual coordinated attack between China, Russia and Iran and other players in the Middle East against the West and Western interests, which then could result in a kind of World War III. There are two different scenarios that we're facing that are very, very different from over 80 years ago, when we actually confronted the Nazis during the Second World War and also Imperial Japan. The first is that we have nuclear weapons. So any major global conflict now would probably involve nuclear weapons being fired, which would destroy millions of people, whole entire cities wiped out. The other prospect as well is that we are not on the same spiritual,
we don't have the same substance, do we?
No, we don't have the same spiritual strength to fight a global war as we did during the Second World War. I mean, you've got to understand that during the Second World War, people were flocking to churches on calls of national days of prayer and repentance for the nation. This is when we saw the deliverance of Dunkirk. We saw miracles take place during the D-Day landings, during the Battle of Britain for this nation, and our nation stood alone against the Nazi threat during the Second World War as the Nazis just took everything under their control. And of course that was a deeply spiritual war because the SS and Hitler would use occultic demonic forces to take territory and bring about the kind of the Third Reich, which was Hitler's plan. So today we are seeing a fundamental attack on our core Christian beliefs and foundations. We don't have that spiritual backbone. We are now multicultural. So in the event of a kind of a Third World War, where would we stand spiritually to be able to defend and pray and intercede for this nation? But maybe this is what it will take in order to bring the West back to God into repentance, that kind of threat of a major war, an escalation of a major war. It's interesting to know what our Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, is saying about this. So he says, it comes as Britain's Defence Secretary Grant Shapps announced today that the UK will send 20,000 armed forces personnel to one of NATO's largest exercises since the Cold War. We see there that the deployment, which Shapps characterised as the UK's biggest to NATO in 4 decades, is aimed at providing vital reassurance over the menace posed by Russian President Putin following his invasion of the Ukraine, Shapps says. Says the British personnel from the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy and Army will deploy across Europe and beyond for the military's alliance latest exercise Steadfast Defender, alongside personnel from 31 other member countries and Sweden, which is a candidate to join the transatlantic alliance. It says today NATO is bigger than ever, but the challenges are bigger too. Shapps said in a wide-ranging speech in London in which he warned the international rules-based order was facing risk dangers. And he says that's why the UK has committed the totality of our air, land and marine assets to NATO. I mean, this is a time when we've actually cut our defence forces back to the kind of bare minimum. And we haven't seen our defence forces cut back this scale since the 1930s and the 1920s. So, you know, what we're going to need if we're seeing these new threats emerging, he's also talking about within 5 years that we could be facing a World War III, then we need a reinvestment in our armed forces and almost to prepare the population for a war footing. So let's have a look at this CBN news item from a few months ago, saying how the US is actually preparing to supply military tanks to the Ukraine to help propel the Russian invaders.
As the war in Ukraine approaches its second year, the United States and Germany have upped their ante in support of Ukraine, now sending tanks to help fight the Russians.
I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, the equivalent of 1 Ukrainian battalion.
NATO allies are also sending help. The UK has pledged to send 14 of its Challenger 2 battle tanks. Germany is releasing 14 Leopard 2 tanks, with up to 60 more Leopards coming from other countries.
About 2 battalions.
Peter Rowe with the Hudson Institute believes the move creates shared escalatory risk.
The Germans really are the key in Europe on this because the Leopard 2, which is really what the Ukrainians want, there are many Leopard 2s in Europe. There's a thriving spare parts market across the continent.
The German tanks should be arriving in weeks. The Abrams could take up to a year, since the U.S. is manufacturing new ones for the Ukrainians.
When the ground hardens again for the summer, we could see a major Ukrainian offensive.
Wednesday's announcement is a reversal of U.S. policy. The Biden administration has delivered dozens of packages of military aid, the latest totaling more than $5 billion in the last month alone.
Together with our allies and partners, we've sent more than 3,000 armored vehicles, more than 8,000 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, and more than 50 advanced multi-launch rocket systems.
But I would just remind your viewers that a lot of that money never leaves the United States because it's money spent on U.S. systems that then go to the Ukrainians. And I would suggest we're getting a pretty good deal in that we're able to basically help dictate terms against the Russians in a major conventional war without shedding any American blood.
The Kremlin responded by calling the move blatant provocation. Wednesday, the Russian Defense Ministry released this video claiming to show a warship conducting hypersonic missile drills in western areas of the Atlantic Ocean. Ukrainian President Zelensky had requested up to 300 tanks. Yesterday, he tweeted his thanks to President Biden, now requesting F-16 fighter jets. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Well, what we're seeing now is as this escalation continues to occur, the need to invest in defense. And as we've been talking a little bit about our Defense Secretary Grant Shapps in the Daily Mail on pages 10 and, well, primarily page 10 and 11 as well. Shapps, the headline reads, "We're in a pre-war world." Now, he indicates we face threats from China, North Korea, and Iran in the next 5 years. It doesn't mention anything there about the Russia element of it, but this is now something that is very evident. It's coming up. I'm sure that was not excluding the possibility of conflict in Russia, because actually he does specifically recognize, well, the Mail highlights this, maybe there's a lack of insight on their own part. In his own quote in the speech, he specifically says, "The era of the peace dividend is over. In 5 years' time, we could be looking at multiple threats, including Russia," Shapps said, "China, Iran, and North Korea." And according to what we've just been talking about, it seems likely that the biggest threat to Europe at the moment, in a military sense, remains Russia. And with this leaked dossier that is being put out, it's saying as early as 2025 they could be seeking to attack Germany. So what we have here in 2024, I'm determined to do even more, and that's why I can announce today the UK will send in some 20,000 personnel to lead one of NATO's largest deployments since the end of the Cold War. That's Grant Shapps in his wide-ranging speech in London.
Yep. And also says that the UK contingent will involve fighter jets and surveillance aircraft. the Navy's most advanced warship and submarines, and a full range of army capabilities, including special operation forces. It says London will send a so-called carrier strike group, pretty much needed in the Red Sea right now, which features its flagship aircraft carrier and F-35B fighter jets and helicopters to the exercises in the North Atlantic, Norwegian Sea and Baltic Sea. Meanwhile, some 16,000 soldiers will be deployed across Eastern Europe from next month to June, taking with them tanks, artillery, helicopters and parachutes. This is on top of the British government giving Ukraine £2.5 billion in aid. Also it says here that Shapps used his most high-profile speech since being appointed to the post in August of Defence Minister to argue that the post-Cold War peace dividend has ended and Western allies must face down foes including China, Iran, North Korea and Russia. He said it's been replaced by a period of hard-headed realism. He added that NATO's adversaries are more connected with each other than ever and Western allies stand at a crossroads. So our adversaries are busy rebuilding their barriers, old enemies are reanimated, battle lines are being redrawn, tanks are literally on Ukraine's lawn, and the foundations of the world order are being shaken to their core.
Indeed, we've talked a great deal on Behind the Headlines about this so-called New World Order, the foundations of it, which are on incredibly shaky ground. We've discussed the problems with ideological multiculturalism and this idea that every belief system is, is equally valid and right and good and true, when it's simply not the case. And these foundations are being shaken to their very core. You mentioned a few minutes ago the spiritual importance behind all of this and the lack of substance that we have as a nation. I mean, we're asking if this war, these wars, the rumors of wars that are abounding are in some way part of that fulfillment of Jesus's words there in the Gospel according to Mathew on the Mount of Olives. We could be looking at this and asking, is the day of the Gentiles coming to an end? Are we seeing the time of the Gentiles that the Apostle Paul speaks of coming to a place of fulfillment, inaugurating a period of time where there's lawlessness, complete anti-Christian sentiment across the Gentile world, at the same time seeing a turning to the Messiah among the Jews? So Grant Shapps, the UK Defence Secretary, has warned that the foundations of the New World Order are being shaken to their core foundations. He said essentially the actions of hostile states such as Russia, China, Iran are intimidating, attacking, and forcing, in many ways, drastic action to try to inhibit, to try to come against this what seems to be inevitable escalation on the global scene.
Absolutely, and of course all this has come out of regarding kind of the American weakness. So it's interesting that when President Trump was in office, that the world was in a kind of era of relative stability and peace, certainly the most peaceful the Middle East had seen, certainly for decades. We see the prospect of the Iranian regime on the verge of political and economic collapse. Hezbollah were complaining that they were running out of money. The Palestinians were completely isolated, and of course we had the Abraham Accords backed up by America as a new defense pact between Israel, the Saudis and the Sunni states against the Iranian nuclear threat. And all that seems to be completely broken down. So what we can really see is that this all really started with Joe Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021, which sent a message to the world and to the enemies of the West that America, the world leader, is in retreat.
Yeah,
And this has emboldened Russia, this has emboldened the Iranians, this has emboldened the Chinese. So until we have a president in the White House that kind of wakes up to the reality, global realities of what we face and the prospect of what we face, it's going to be very, very difficult to push back. But of course, we also have to discuss that what we've seen in recent years as well is the unleashing of demonic evil principalities, because we are not dealing with flesh and blood. We're dealing with principalities and powers of darkness. So the freedoms that we have that have been fought for centuries, such as freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, democratic institutions, the right to choose our own government, the right to attend church, the freedom of press. These are values that each generation has to fight and protect, otherwise we lose them. And so we're in the danger of losing this, not only from the inside now, but also from outside forces. And we also know that the globalists are trying to create a one world government, pushing the world closer together. But the reality is the world is becoming further and further apart. And, the conflict between East and West it's like it hasn't been really since the height of the Cold War. But going back to the kind of Olivert Discourse that Mathew 24, Jesus talks about in Mathew 24, that you will hear of wars and rumours of wars, is a clear warning about the times in which we're living in now. And what we've really seen, and we've done a programme on this, looking at the Olivert Discourse, looking at the birth pains that Jesus warned about would come before his return, they've been accelerating ever since we've gone through the global pandemic in 2020. And we're seeing that kind of flashpoints emerge, but those flashpoints are getting bigger and bigger. And we're now seeing our Defence Secretary warning that we're on a path to war within 5 years. And he's talking about a global war. He's talking about World War III.
He's even talking about escalation in areas we've not even addressed, North Korea, and even the assertive stance of Venezuela also. So South America fits into this as well. But what's interesting, Simon, you can almost without exception take the arenas where the instigators of such conflict are finding themselves primarily, and you can unpack the ideological framework on which their nations, their governments are operating, and you see a total lack of righteousness. We're talking long-standing, a total lack of justice, a total lack of understanding what is good, a total lack of regard for the one true God, who He is. There's no concept of truth. There's no concept of moral clarity in these situations. It's all about power. It's all about that antichrist spirit of the wealthier in many cases getting much, much wealthier, and those who are below or who are outside of the status quo, outside of their political agenda, coming to nothing. This has been ramping up. In the last century it was ramping up, especially with communistic ideology running rampant, gaining footholds in the West. We have a lot of influence of that ideology still even here in the UK. We have to remember and learn the lessons of history that the U.S. in its own involvement in World War II was very reluctant to get involved, and you could say would have been very happy to some degree with such a policy of appeasement as Neville Chamberlain was pursuing, primarily because of the amount of German immigrants who were in the United States and the fear that Hitler would have had a lot of sympathizers in the U.S., which he did. And so how much more then should we be concerned in this day and time when we have a proliferation of not just one sort of ideology potentially on the table, the ideology of the nationalist, socialistic parties, but we have religious multiculturalism as well, with a massive inability, especially to confront the radical Islamism that is being displayed on our streets, that is infecting our university systems, that has come in and corrupted our children in schools and through a variety of means.
Also cultural Marxism, so it's this red-green alliance known as the kind of far left, together with the Islamists, to destroy everything that's sacred about our country, our society, its history and its traditions, in order to weaken it. And that is the danger. We didn't face this problem in the late 1930s, but in 2024 we face those problems. We are facing a force that would side, a huge proportion of our population would side with our enemies. And this is what makes this whole situation very dangerous and very, very difficult. How do you then prepare a whole population for a kind of a global war that we haven't seen for over 80 years? How do you prepare a population for that? How do you then protect your citizens from that? How do you win a war like that with today's technology, with the threat of nuclear weapons, which is far more dangerous? And it just shows you how precarious the world has come as we move closer and closer to the last days and the return of Jesus Christ. But before then, we have to see the emergence of the man of lawlessness, or known as the Antichrist, to be the world leader who will bring an era of peace for a very, very short term. And he will be considered the Messiah and the Savior of the world. So no wonder people cry out, or one of the slogans people cry out in the last days will be the crying out for peace and safety. As we see the world enter into more chaos, more regional conflicts that could lead to a global conflict, of course, people are going to say, we want peace and safety and willing to do anything to achieve it.
And it is our responsibility, it is our duty, it is our desire and joy, really, to, as followers of Jesus Christ, continue to uphold His banner, knowing that He is victorious. Yahweh Nisi is His name. He's the Lord, our banner. He is the one who gives victory. So whatever may come our way, the trials, the problems, the wars, all of these situations, we shouldn't be surprised. Jesus says, do not be troubled. Take heart. I have overcome the world.
Absolutely. And the Lord is also known in Hebrew as Adonai Se'avot, the Lord of armies. This is who we need to place our hope and our trust in. And our government and our society also needs to place our trust in the God of Israel, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and his son, Yeshua HaMashiach. So we want to thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.